I think we should have another round of applause for the organizers of Web Weekend Kathmandu, because I know they've worked incredibly hard to make this happen, and they've done a wonderful job, and they've been really lovely, and I'm super flattered and happy to be here. I'm excited to be presenting last. There's a little bit of pressure, I realize. The very last slide in Artur's presentation, I think it said something like "have fun coding," or "coding should be fun," or something like that. I feel like that was a very good introduction for what I'm going to talk about today, actually. All of the talks today were very good and very brilliant, and lots of things that you can probably take back to your profession or work or help develop your skills in some professional context. I promise you none of that with my talk. I mean, if you do, please come talk to me, because I want to know where you work. My talk today is going to largely be about having a lot of fun coding and learning a little bit about web music protocols and building interesting things with them. It'll make more sense as I go along, I think. So without further ado, let's get started. So first, I'd like to introduce myself. That is actually me. That has been a point of discussion among the organizers and I and the other speakers. It's a good argument for getting your headshot updated more than once every 3 years or so. Anyway, my name is George. I always like to share a couple random facts about myself. I find when I go see other people present at conferences, it helps me remember something about their talk later if they personalize themselves up front, if they humanize themselves a little bit. So I'm going to share just some random things that maybe they'll stick with you, maybe they won't, I don't know. So I've been freelancing. I've been an independent developer for over 13 years. I think in JavaScript years, that makes me about 72 or something like that, which means I can retire, which is great. You can't really read that because of the way the screen is doing things. I once spent a year living as a digital nomad all around the world, continuously in 18 different countries. I love talking about that because it was so much fun. Anyway, that's a random fact that's fun to throw out. It's always interesting. I'm based out of Portland, Oregon. I don't know if that's actually a fun or interesting fact, but I'm from the US. I'm from Portland, Oregon. That's almost as far as you could probably fly in the US to get to Nepal, I'm pretty sure. One of my funny personal claims to fame that I should put on LinkedIn is I accidentally broke Marvel.com for about 30 seconds due to an errant Git push. That was me? Is that what you said? They were linking directly to the raw code in what's probably my only and best known open source project, something called Konami.js. Has anyone heard of that? I'm curious. Every couple hands? Okay, yeah. Sometimes I get more, and it always surprises the heck out of me. Just for some clarification, what that project does is it enables the Konami code to work on your website, so you can then have it reveal Easter eggs and do silly things like that. Anyway, Marvel was using it. I got really excited when I found this out. I tried to make a quick improvement. I broke their site. I reverted it really quickly. I don't think anyone ever noticed. It's also sort of on brand for me, I realize. My most well-known open source project is frivolous and kind of pointless, but just fun. And then the last thing, well, Kushma already introduced this and sort of shared this with you, but I once cheated while I was running a marathon in North Korea. In my defense, it was an accident. I wasn't trying to cheat. For a little bit of context on that, the way the course was set up is you do 4 loops around the city. And I did the first 2. I did okay. I was doing all right. And then I kind of hurt myself, and I had to stop. And I just ended up walking the 3rd one, and I was okay with that. Long story short, I assumed they would know that I hadn't finished the race. Then 2 days later, they gave me, there's proof, by the way. There's me in North Korea. You don't have to look far to find a flag. There's my certificate of completion, so for what that's worth. I promise there's code eventually in this talk. Oh, and then the last thing I wanted to share before diving into the subject properly, getting back to how my photo looks nothing like me, the organizers made these lovely gifts for us where we have these coffee mugs with our faces drawn on them, but they only had the photos we'd given them to base the drawings on. And so mine, in particular, does not bear. I love it. I'm going to keep it forever. Anyhow. But more relevantly, as you may have picked up by now, I like to make things. I really enjoy creative coding. I like making arts. I like to use my tools, my programming tools, in sort of unexpected, maybe unintended ways. In this talk, I'm going to show you how I've made things using MIDI, a music protocol I'll dive into a little bit, JavaScript, and tiny computers and not so tiny computers. It's a component of this talk that we'll touch on. But yeah, I'm just going to show you some fun things I've made with this and why I think this is actually a valuable exercise at the end. So what we're talking about today, we're talking about MIDI. It's a protocol, it's an acronym. It stands for Musical Instrument Device Interface. Tiny computers, when I do bring that up later, I'm going to be talking about things like Arduinos, Espruinos, RasperryPis. Maybe raise your hand, I'm curious, who's heard of the Espruino? Anyone? Okay, who's heard of Arduino? Yeah, okay, that one's like globally just popular. I'm hoping I can turn some of you on to the Espruino. The difference with Espruino is you can, there's a JavaScript interpreter on board on the device. I'm actually holding one here in my hand. I've actually reprogrammed this to be my clicker in a fancy way, which I'll elaborate on here in a little bit. And then the third thing we're talking about, obviously, is JavaScript, sort of the lingua franca of the web. For better or worse, it seems here to stay, and you can find it literally in everything, from hardware to the browser to the server, et cetera. Oops. Okay, so what actually makes this combination of things interesting? This combination of technologies is, I found, actually a very low barrier to entry way to start dabbling with basic IoT concepts and hardware programming, if you've ever had an interest in that. I saw a lot of hands go up when I asked if you heard of the Arduino. One of the things that can be a little daunting about that is to get it to do anything cool, you got to start wiring it up and creating elaborate circuits, and then you have to know about electronics. And that's fascinating and very cool, but that's a lot of extra stuff you have to learn, which can be a little intimidating sometimes. With this technology stack, there's a little bit less of that. So with MIDI, we can talk to real-world musical hardware, as I'll be demonstrating, and with JavaScript and the web and the browser, we can build virtual interfaces. When we combine the two, we can build an interface that kind of straddles both worlds. We can have something in the physical real world that we're interacting with or speaking through in some capacity, and we'll have responses in the virtual world. And that gives there's a lot of creative potential in that combination, I find. And it's just a good tool set for that kind of creative exploration, that kind of coding. So why JavaScript? I feel like I should just keep posting that in bigger and bigger letters. Why JavaScript? Honestly, basically JavaScript's everywhere. Like I said, it's in the browser, it's on the server, it's embedded hardware now. It's probably in places I'm not even thinking of. It's like for better or for worse, it's everywhere, so that's a good language to learn and explore and teach these kind of. It may not be the most efficient language, depending on what you're trying to do. I'm doing a different talk right now about machine learning and creative uses for that, and you can do it, and it's very interesting, but it's not necessarily the most efficient. Community traction. There are so many meetups and conferences and things out there, open source projects. If a new startup has an API that they want the rest of the world to start using, they're probably going to have a JavaScript SDK to go with that, or some sort of interface you can talk to. Now is like a very good time to be a JavaScript developer. It's a synchronous nature is actually a very natural fit with the way the MIDI protocol wants to behave. MIDI doesn't really care when things happen. It's very event-driven, and through some sort of happy accident, even though MIDI was invented in the early mid-'80s, before JavaScript was a twinkle in Brendan, whatever his name is, eye, it just feels very natural and at home when you start writing JavaScript software that talks to MIDI. And then why tiny computers? To be perfectly honest, it's just because I really love them, but I think there's also a good argument for it. So we're talking about, like I said, Arduinos, Espruinos, even RasperryPis, just small, compact computers which are really ideal for making standalone creative projects. Here's some of these I have at home. That white circle there in the middle is actually the one that I'm holding up here in my hand, the Espruino. It's actually called the Puck. And then the one to the left is a different Espruino. And anyway, just sort of showing you what I'm talking about when I talk about tiny computers. And then I have the logos on these slides for reasons I don't honestly entirely remember. But just Adafruit is a great place to look if you want to see. They have lots of really great example projects for those kind of things too. And then Espruino. So the fun part about this particular Espruino, I said I programmed it and turned it into a clicker. I didn't just turn it into a clicker. I turn this into a MIDI instrument. It's a MIDI Bluetooth instrument. My computer right now thinks this is some kind of musical instrument, and it doesn't really know what it can do. It doesn't really care. But every time I click this, it sends a musical note. It sends a C, the C note, to my computer. My slideshow is a JavaScript program that is using the WebMIDI API to listen for MIDI signals from an instrument. It's hearing that particular note from this instrument, and then it's progressing the slides like this. So I can click it once, and the C will take me forward. If I click it twice, I get a D. It takes me back. This is also a good way to wear out the button. And if I hit it 3 times, if I'm feeling kind of nervous, oh, did that work? There we go. I always bring my own applause just in case. But now I got a little off track. I'm not sure why. Another fun thing I did today, because this was acting up, is I reprogrammed my little musical keyboard to also progress my slides forward. So I'm going to go back a few slides now here, so bear with me. That's where we left off, I think, right? Okay. Well, we can go forward now. Okay. Tiny computers. They're affordable and generally easy to use. I didn't realize how funny that was going to be. They're powerful enough to perform a variety of tasks. And like I said, they're great for standalone projects and creative tinkering of all kinds. I think I'm going to have to alternate between those because that's going to get too funny. Some of them can run JavaScript natively. There's a great project called Johnny5, I think it's called. Yeah, Johnny5.js, which I don't actually have a slide for that, but if you want to know more about JavaScript on hardware, I really suggest looking into that project. And you can also interface with MIDI devices in a variety of ways. So why MIDI? So let's talk about what MIDI is. So like I said, it's an acronym. It stands for Musical Instrument Device Interface. But there's a lot of confusion surrounding this. I was actually having a discussion with someone here about this, and there's a lot of common confusion about what MIDI is exactly, because that acronym is used to describe a whole lot of things that technically use MIDI, but by themselves they are not MIDI, if that makes any sense. So what we're mostly talking about, what it is at its core is a protocol. It is a way for musical instruments like this keyboard up here, to communicate with computers and other MIDI-capable hardware, basically. It's a protocol so they can communicate. It made all kinds of sense in 1983 or so when it was invented. But it's also sometimes used to describe the standard. So the protocol is actually just the transmission of these numbers and messages. The standard is what dictates when I push this button and it sends the number 60 or whatever. That is going to be a C. Does that make sense a little bit? It's also sometimes interchangeably used to describe the MIDI file format, which I find is more common. When I say, oh, do I talk about MIDI? People are like, oh, I love that chintzy Windows 95 music or whatever that came with my computer. So I just want to clarify, it's not this. I mean, that's a MIDI file, and there's MIDI involved, but I can't exactly point to that and call that MIDI. It's not this. I think all of these came with Windows 95. I'm dating myself. Or even this. What's funny about this one is I found out Brian Orr he was an intern at Microsoft, and his job was to write this song for Windows 95, and it got shipped on your computer as a MIDI file, which you could play and then change all the instruments. Computers are weird. So MIDI, the protocol, like I said, allows electronic musical instruments to communicate with other MIDI-capable hardware. This is done by sending and receiving 3-byte MIDI messages. The MIDI standard, like I said, it gives our MIDI messages meaning. It lets us know not just like which note is being played, but is that note being turned on? Is it being turned off? And a whole host of other music-specific parameters that can be specified. A good parallel, I think, of is HTTP codes. Like, who's familiar with HTTP codes like the ones I have up here? Like 404, page not found. Everybody's seen that one. 301, move permanently. My favorite, 418, I'm a teapot. That's real. Look it up. It's real. I think that's actually a good parallel. It's like those numbers by themselves don't mean anything, but because of the standard, we know what the 404 means, the page is missing. Because of the MIDI standard, we know that these MIDI numbers, these messages, mean certain things in the musical context. That's all that means. And I have this bullet point up here just to point out there's a lot of strange parallels between the MIDI world and like software in general. There's like an association that maintains the standard and they ratify things, and there's been amendments and like forks of the original MIDI protocol and all kinds of interesting things. And so the file format, when we're talking about MIDI, describes a sequence of MIDI events, basically. It describes not just the notes themselves and whether they're on or off, but the timing surrounding those. This is incredibly antiquated reference, but I always think of a player piano and those sheets of paper. It's kind of like that. The punches, the holes in the sheets of paper sort of dictate the notes and how long they're playing, the timing surrounding them. I feel like this is a more modern GIF I could throw in there. It sort of feels like Guitar Hero to me, too. I don't know. That guy's rocking. Okay, so when we look at these MIDI messages through the computer, though, they look kind of like this. We get a 3-byte message. Here's what they look like in binary. Every message, like I said, consists of 3 bytes. And the standard dictates there are only 2 different types of bytes. There's a status byte, which tells us what is going on, and then 2 different data bytes, which we can use to describe parameters related to what's going on. A status message always begins with a 1, data bytes always begin with a 0, which means we only have 7 digits left to start expressing things. And then for a status message, we actually even have fewer, because the first 3 bytes describe the status of the message, and then we just have the remaining 4. But let me show you. That's hard to follow, I realize. I'm getting through it really quickly. And here's a table that sort of dictates that. So if you want to yeah, that just sort of explains like what all the different bytes would be for these different commands. So if that's my binary example, basically, by the time I get into my browser and by the time I'm playing with MIDI messages in JavaScript using the WebMIDI API, I'm basically getting an array of 3 numbers. And that's kind of all you need to know. If I press a button on this device, I'm going to get 3 numbers. They mean things, but if you're not necessarily making music, you don't necessarily need to know what those numbers mean. You can kind of just figure it out for yourself. I have bought strange MIDI devices in Alibaba that came with no instructions. And I basically sat there and just pushed buttons trying to figure out how they work, looking at the numbers that will go through. And then in a cleaner sort of JSON formatted thing, it might look like this. Okay, so back to the question. It's, just to summarize, it's an asynchronous protocol that lets electronic musical instruments communicate with computers and other MIDI-capable devices. It lets us have a 2-way conversation with hardware in the real world. You know, I can press the notes on this keyboard. And obviously, you know, when I hit those notes, it's sending information back to the browser, and it's interpreting that. It's playing sound. It's moving my slideshow forward. I think it's playing applause if I do this one. Members of this one. That was the one. Okay. It lets us have a 2-way conversation. This one is only sending, but some of the other devices I have up here can receive MIDI messages, and that's where it gets kind of fun and interesting. So I've sort of buried the lead on this. So the coolest part about this is we can use JavaScript to talk to MIDI-capable devices because our browsers support MIDI for reasons I don't fully understand, but it's cool. Any Chromium-based browser is going to support WebMIDI. So Chromium, Chrome, Electron, the latest Microsoft Edge. Not quite Firefox yet, but it's been coming soon for a long time. There's actually something like 73% global coverage. Not that I don't think this would ever matter. It's such a niche application, I don't know why you would ever entirely care about global coverage for this particular feature. But just so you know, 73%. And so MIDI controllers, basically instruments, come in a lot of different flavors. There's a lot of variety in MIDI hardware. And some of the fun is like, you know, a traditional piano keyboard just has a bunch of buttons, but some of them have more interesting interfaces that might be fun to play with as developers. And then last but not least, you can even build your own. Getting back to small computers, you can program your Arduino to be recognized as a MIDI device and then just go to town and build your own custom buttons and controllers and just go absolutely nuts. I've seen some really cool things that people have made. And so here's the keyboard I have up here on my page. Here's an old synthesizer that technically if I had an old school MIDI to USB adapter, I could plug this into my computer and it would still work with my demos. I could make my slideshow work with that thing, believe it or not. I have one of these up here too. It's more of a DJ pad thing, and that's kind of a cool interface because now we have knobs and now we have buttons, and like they're pressure sensitive, so we actually have some of the messages being returned let me know how hard I'm actually hitting the buttons, so it's an extra layer of interactivity we can start playing with. And then this is sort of a heavy-duty foot switch. I didn't bring it with me because it's hard to get through the airport, but it's something you can put on the ground and like step on, which is kind of a fun interface. And that's a much bigger version of that. You can get something like this, which is sort of like putting the gas pedal in your car or something like that. It's basically a volume control that you can play with your foot, but that's another interesting physical interface. This one is actually breath controlled. I've never used one, but I've seen people play them. Yeah, I would love to play with one of those. Those are very interesting. This one is actually motion controlled. It has a gyroscope, and the X, Y, and Z parameters map to MIDI messages. And I actually brought that with me, and I'm going to show you that in a little bit. Or you can build your own like this guy. Does anyone recognize him? I'm curious. All right. He's a musician, but I'm like kind of dating myself in a really weird way with that guy, so I'll leave that. And here's another homemade one that someone made. This is actually a really cool little instrument from an Arduino, I think. And that's one I made. I actually think I brought that with me. I forgot about that. I can explain that one another time. And let's see. Oh, yeah, there's my banana piano that I made one time. There it is. So I took a different kind of microcontroller. I turned it into a MIDI instrument, and then I wrote a web page that I connected it to the capacitive sensors, and then I had a little banana piano. And what I actually ended up building was my idea was to make like flashcards for learning a language, and so I plugged like different kinds of fruits into them, and then I used the speech API in Chrome to have it tell me what I was touching in different languages, which is kind of a fun demo. I kind of wanted to do that one today, but I could only bring so much with me. So what does it actually look like when we use this? So who's ever used like the geolocation API or the notification API in the browser or something like that? It's basically like that. If you click in the little, if you're using Chrome and you click on the little eye next to the website, you'll get the list of all the things that page has permission to access. You will see MIDI access is one of those down there. So it looks like this. It's very similar. You basically request access to the MIDI device. You get back an object letting us know whether or not the user has allowed it. If they have, then now you can start listening for events on that device. And if they haven't, then, well, you can't, I guess. Very straightforward. Once you have access to the MIDI objects, the MIDI access object, then you can iterate through all of the instruments that are plugged in. Just to sort of demonstrate that here, I have this thing that I made. This is called I call it my controller explorer. So it goes through all of the MIDI instruments that are connected to my device right now. I've got those 4. And it lets me know what the different numbers are, what the different messages are as I play them, or if I do over this one. I'm spinning a knob right now, so you can see the numbers change very quickly on this device over here. Yeah, and then so we have to set up an event listener to handle when a message comes in through that MIDI device, and when we do, we get a data array that has those 3 bytes I mentioned earlier, and that's basically it. And then we can just start playing with it. So let me run through some demos of things I've made that are not precisely music things using MIDI. That I think that help sort of touch on why I think this is a fun combination of technologies, why it's a cool way to explore building creative and interesting things. And let me plug this in. Let me turn this on. I'm going to start with the motion-controlled one, just because that's interesting and kind of fun. So, oh, here it is. OK, so if I hold my hand perfectly still, so right now I can't remember which coordinate I mapped to which thing, but it's changing the RGB values for the background down there. And if I tilt my hand in different directions, I have sort of a weird, very inefficient way of selecting colors for my web pages. If I see something I like, I think I set it up so I can go like this. Yep, and it'll record what the RGB value is. If I put my hand down on my side, that's kind of a weird pink salmon color. If I put it straight out, I guess I haven't seen a good green yet. Oh, there we go. Maybe I got to go like this. I find that actually doing it with HSL is a little more interesting, because when I hold it perfectly flat, it's white, which is kind of cool. and I start to raise it, and then we get sort of a red color, I guess. All right, and then if I go straight down, we should also get the same red color, and then if I twist my hand slightly and do it like this. Anyway, you get the idea. It's kind of fun. I had a lot of fun making that. And my next idea, oops, that was not the one I meant. I thought, well, what could I do with that in sort of a creative, interesting way? So I tried to make a game where I would randomly pick a color, and then I would have to contort myself to try to match that color as well as oh, got it. There we go, got one. Let's see if I can get that blue. See if I can get that blue. Oh, we're getting close. It gets bigger when I get closer. There we go. And then I found actually the really easy way to cheat with this game. Is just kind of go like this. And eventually, there we go. Oh, normally I get a 1 when that happens. Anyway, just kind of go like this. Eventually you'll get them. It's kind of fun. Let me show you a couple other demos here. How am I on time? I think I'm probably running over. Do I have another 5, 10? I'm good? Okay, good. Thank you. Let me show you. Oh, here's a very good one, since I've not shown you this tool yet. So I've got this thing up here. It's called a Launchpad. It's sort of a DJ equipment. And I was playing with it and figuring out how to send messages, and I made a very just simple drawing application here. You can see in a minute. Let's see. Not a real high-fidelity drawing application. It's like an 8x8 pixel art sort of a thing. So it's kind of fun. And then I was playing with that, and I thought, what could I do to make that more interesting? And so then I made this interactive maze, which is kind of hard to explain. But so I have a little guy that starts in the corner there, a little person, a little blue pixel. And with the keyboard on my computer here, I can move it around the screen like this. That's pretty straightforward. And then I thought it'd be kind of fun to create sort of a 2-person interactive experience where one person's on the computer or whatever, moving around like I'm doing here, but then the other person could maybe physically draw like a maze. Let's see. Where do I put that here? Yeah, let's do it like that. And now when I try to move, I can't move through the walls, and so I actually have like an interactive maze that I have to traverse with this thing, which is kind of a fun game. And I think the next step with this would be to like build a custom board that has way more things that could actually be more fun. And see if I can do one or. I'll do 2 more real quick, just because I haven't used that instrument yet. So this was also, this particular device has knobs on it, or sort of like dial controls. Oh, maybe I deleted the webcam. Oh well, you can sort of see it. It's not that big of a room. It has dials and things I control, and so I set this up to control all of the different CSS filter parameters. Just because I thought it was a fun and more natural, kind of intuitive way to like fine-tune a particular blend of things that I was trying to explore. And so, let's see, I have to put it on program 4, I think. There we go. And so now with this dial, I can play with the sepia property. With this one, I can play with the opacity, which isn't quite as interesting. Just the brightness. In case you're tired of like actually typing in these numbers and want to find a very elaborate way to set your different CSS properties here. Q rotate is always my favorite because it's kind of trippy. And then the very last one I will show you, we're going to go back to the Launchpad for now. And this one, I think, is probably my favorites. Let's see, there it is. Who's heard of the game Go? It's a pretty old game. I was trying to figure out games I could play on here. I'm still working on chess and checkers, but I found a version of JavaScript Go that I was able to tweak and hook MIDI into to send and receive signals from here. So I can now play Go on, we'll do it like this. Yeah, I can do it like that. So I can use my mouse and actually play Go here on the screen. I'm a terrible Go player, by the way. And that's kind of fun. Oops. Yeah. Let me just do this to make sure it works. Boom, there we go, playing Go. But I can actually physically play it here on the board. I don't need to look at the screen at all. And as I hit the different keys here, let's see that. There we go. So we have go on the go, I guess. And I have many more demos. If you're interested in talking about this kind of stuff, because there's always one or two people who have a lot of questions, I'm more than happy to talk to you after about that. Yeah, and thank you very much for having me. I guess the last thing I wanted to say that I think this kind of creative exploration and playing with our code and our tools really makes us better developers in the long run. So I encourage you to go out and just do something fun and explore and use your tools in ways that maybe they were not meant to. So thank you.